The nanny was hired to look after triplets who had lost their mother, and soon realized that the children were suffering much more than they appeared to be. A child's high-pitched scream cut through the air, making Alison Thompson freeze with her hand on the front door handle. Her heart raced, and she hesitated for a moment before entering the Harringtons' house. The job advertisement didn't mention anything about screaming. Alison, a 28-year-old woman with wavy brown hair and compassionate green eyes, had arrived in Asheville, North Carolina, just a week earlier. A recent graduate in child psychology, she was eager to begin her career as a specialized nanny. Working with the Harrington triplets had seemed perfect, challenging but rewarding. Now, faced with that anguished cry, she wasn't so sure. Taking a deep breath, Alison turned the knob and went inside. The interior of the house was a shocking contrast to the well-kept facade. Scattered toys covered the living room floor, and the air smelled of burnt food mixed with something indefinable, perhaps sadness. "Hello?" Alison called out, her voice echoing through the silent house. The shouting had ceased, replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence. Hurried footsteps sounded upstairs, and a man appeared at the top of the stairs. He looked exhausted, with deep circles under his eyes and unkempt grey hair. "You must be Alison," he said, coming down the stairs. "I'm Robert Harrington. Sorry about the mess. Things have been difficult." Alison nodded, feeling a wave of empathy. "Don't worry, Mr. Harrington. I'm here to help." Robert ran a hand over his face, looking momentarily lost. "The triplets are upstairs. Ava, Liam and Zoe. They're 5 years old. Ava was the one you heard screaming. She's been having nightmares." Before Alison could reply, a small figure appeared at the top of the stairs. It was a girl with messy blonde hair and wide blue eyes. She looked at Alison with a mixture of curiosity and fear. "Ava, darling," Robert said softly. "This is Alison. She's going to look after you for a while." Ava didn't reply. Instead, she walked slowly down the stairs, her eyes never leaving Alison. When she reached the last step, she stopped and said in an almost inaudible voice, "Are you leaving like Mum?" Alison's heart broke. She knelt down to be at the girl's eye level. "No, Ava, I'm not leaving. I'm here to stay with you and your brothers." Ava studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly. Then, to Alison's surprise, the girl threw herself into her arms, clinging to her as if her life depended on it. Robert watched the scene with a mixture of relief and pain. "The other two are in their room," he said quietly. "Liam rarely speaks since it happened. And Zoe, well, she pretends everything's fine. But I know she's suffering just as much as the others." Alison hugged Ava gently, feeling the small body tremble against hers. "Mr. Harrington, may I ask what exactly happened to their mother?" Robert closed his eyes for a moment, as if gathering his strength. "It was 3 months ago. A car accident. Caroline, my wife, she didn't survive." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and painful. Alison felt Ava tighten her embrace, and she stroked the girl's back gently. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said, her voice full of compassion. Robert nodded, unable to speak. After a moment, he pulled himself together. "I work from home, but with 3 children, I simply can't cope on my own. They need someone who can be totally there for them." Alison stood up, still holding Ava in her arms. "I understand, Mr. Harrington. I'll do my best to help." "Please, call me Robert," he said, a slight smile appearing on his tired face. "Come on, I'll show you the rest of the house and introduce you to the others." As they walked up the stairs, Alison couldn't help but notice the pictures on the walls, images of a happy, complete family. Robert, a beautiful woman who must have been Caroline, and 3 smiling children. The contrast with the current reality was painful. In the upstairs hallway, Robert stopped in front of a closed door. "This is the triplets' room," he explained. "They've refused to sleep apart since, well, you know." He knocked gently on the door. "Liam, Zoe, there's someone here I want you to meet." There was no reply. Robert sighed and slowly opened the door. The room was large, with 3 small beds. In one of them, a boy was sitting, looking out of the window without really seeing anything. In the other, A little girl was playing quietly with a doll, her face a mask of false joy. "Children," Robert said softly, "this is Alison. She's going to look after you for a while." The boy, Liam, didn't even move. The girl, Zoe, looked at Alison with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Hi, Alison," she said, her voice forcedly cheerful. "Would you like to play house with me?" Alison felt her heart squeeze. The pain of these children was palpable, hidden under layers of silence and false joy. She knew she had a long way to go to win their trust and help them deal with their loss. "I'd love to play house with you, Zoe," Alison replied with a gentle smile. She turned to Liam, who still hadn't moved. "What about you, Liam? Would you like to join us?" Liam didn't answer, but for a brief moment, his eyes met Alison's. In that look, she saw an ocean. In that look, she saw an ocean of pain and confusion. Robert put a hand on Alison's shoulder. "I'll let you get acquainted with them. My office is just down the hall if you need anything." When Robert left, closing the door softly behind him, Alison found herself alone with 3 deeply traumatized children. Ava still clung to her. Zoe pretended everything was fine. And Liam refused to acknowledge her presence. At that moment, Alison truly understood the magnitude of the challenge ahead of her. These children were suffering far more than they appeared to be, and she knew she would need all her skill, patience and love to help them through this difficult time. Taking a deep breath, Alison prepared herself for what would undoubtedly be the most challenging and potentially rewarding task of her life. With a gentle smile, she sat down on the floor between Zoe and Liam's beds, with Ava still in her arms. "So," she said softly, "how about we start playing house? And maybe, while we're playing it, you can tell me a bit about yourselves." As Zoe began to organize the dolls and Ava slowly released her embrace, Alison noticed a slight movement from Liam. He still wasn't looking at her, but his body had turned slightly in her direction. It was a small start, but it was a start, and for Alison that was enough for now. She knew the road would be long and difficult, but she was determined to help these children find the light again amid the darkness of their loss. The days passed slowly in the Harrington household, each one bringing its own challenges and small victories. Alison quickly realized that caring for the triplets would be much more than just supervising play and preparing meals. Each child required a unique approach, and she was determined to find a way to achieve them. Ava, the most expressive of the 3, alternated between moments of intense attachment and angry outbursts. One particularly difficult morning, Alison found the girl sitting on the bathroom floor, surrounded by shards of a broken mirror. "Ava!" Alison exclaimed, carefully entering the room. "What happened, honey?" Ava looked at her, tears streaming down her face. "I wanted to see Mommy," she sobbed. "Daddy always says she's watching us, but I can't see her." Alison's heart broke. She knelt down next to Ava, minding the shards. "Oh, Ava," she said softly, "your mother is always with you, but not in a way that we can see with our eyes." "Then how?" Ava asked, her voice trembling. Alison thought for a moment. "Close your eyes," she instructed gently. When Ava obeyed, Alison continued. "Now, think of a happy moment with your mother. It can be any moment." Ava was silent for a few seconds, then a small smile appeared on her face. "I'm remembering when she used to make me cookies." "Great," Alison smiled. "Can you smell the cookies? Hear her laugh?" Ava nodded, her smile growing. "That's how your mother is with you, Ava. In your memories, in your heart. You don't need a mirror to see her. She's always here." Alison gently touched Ava's chest. The girl opened her eyes, looking at Alison with a mixture of sadness and understanding. "I miss her so much," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart," Alison replied, pulling Ava into a careful hug. "And it's okay to miss her. Let's clean up, and then how about we make some cookies together?" As Ava helped clean up the shards, closely supervised by Alison, the nanny couldn't help but notice the small step forward they had taken. It was progress, however small. Liam, on the other hand, remained a constant challenge. His silence was almost impenetrable, and Alison often found herself watching him, trying to decipher what was going on behind those distant eyes. One afternoon, while Ava and Zoe were playing in the yard, Alison found Liam huddled in a corner of the living room. a photo album open on his lap. She approached cautiously, sitting down next to him without saying a word. For several minutes, they sat there in silence, Liam slowly turning the pages. Each photo showed happy family moments, birthdays, holidays, ordinary days, transformed into precious memories by Caroline's presence. Alison watched a solitary tear run down Liam's cheek. Instinctively, she reached out and gently dried it. To her surprise, Liam didn't pull away. "You know," Alison said softly, "sometimes, when you can't find the right words, it's good to just feel. It's okay to cry, Liam. It's okay to miss you." Liam turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting Alison's for the first time since she had arrived. There were no words, but in that gaze, Alison saw an ocean of emotions: pain, fear, loneliness. She held out her arm, offering a hug without demanding anything. For a moment, Liam hesitated. Then, to Alison's surprise and joy, he leaned towards her, allowing her to wrap her arms around him. They stayed like that for a long time, Liam finally allowing some of his pent-up emotions to surface. Alison held him tightly, murmuring words of comfort and rubbing gentle circles on his back. When they finally separated, Alison saw something new in Liam's eyes, a tiny spark of trust. He still didn't speak, but that shared moment was significant progress. Zoe, on the other hand, presented a different challenge. Her false cheerfulness was a mask that rarely fell, and Alison knew that behind that forced smile lay a deep pain that needed to be addressed. One night, after putting Ava and Liam to bed, Alison found Zoe in the kitchen, methodically organizing and rearranging the magnets on the fridge. "Hey, Zoe," Alison said softly. "What are you doing?" "I'm making everything pretty for when Mum gets back," Zoe replied, her cheerful tone contrasting painfully with the content of her words. Alison felt her heart squeeze. She knelt down beside Zoe, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Zoe, darling, you know your mother isn't coming back, don't you?" For a moment, Zoe's smile faltered. Then it came back with full force. "Of course she is. She's just on a long trip. But she'll be back. She promised she'd always come back." Alison took a deep breath, knowing she was about to sail into dangerous waters. "Zoe, sometimes people make promises they can't keep, not because they don't want to, but because some things are out of our control." Zoe's smile began to tremble, and Alison saw tears forming in her eyes. "Your mother loved you, Ava and Liam, very much. She never wanted to leave you. But sometimes sad things happen, and we can't change them no matter how much we want to." Zoe's smile finally crumbled, and she fell into Alison's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. "I know," she cried. "I know she's not coming back. But it hurts so much, Alison. It hurts so much." Alison hugged Zoe tightly, her own tears falling silently. "I know, sweetheart, I know it hurts. But you don't have to pretend that it's okay. It's okay not to be okay sometimes." They stood there in the kitchen for a long time, Zoe finally allowing her pain to surface, and Alison offering the comfort and reassurance the girl so desperately needed. When Zoe finally calmed down, Alison gently took her to bed. As she tucked her in, Zoe looked up at her with swollen but clear eyes. "Thank you, Alison," she whispered. "Whenever you need me, I'll be here," Alison promised, kissing Zoe's forehead softly. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep, Alison found herself in the living room with Robert. She updated him on the day's progress, Ava's moment of understanding, the silent connection with Liam, and Zoe's cathartic breakdown. Robert listened intently, his eyes filling with tears. "I don't know how to thank you, Alison," he said, his voice breaking. "You're doing more for them in a few weeks than I've managed to do in months." Alison smiled gently. "You're doing the best you can, Robert. They just needed someone who could concentrate fully on them. You've been amazing, considering everything that's happened." Robert nodded, wiping his eyes. "Still, it's a relief to see some progress. I think, for the first time since Caroline left, I'm starting to hope that maybe, just maybe, we can get through this." As she prepared for bed that night, Alison reflected on the day. It had been emotionally exhausting, but also incredibly rewarding. Every small step forward with the children was a victory, and she was determined to keep fighting for them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she knew, but also new opportunities for healing and growth. And Alison would be there, ready to face whatever came, alongside the Harrington triplets. Autumn arrived in Asheville with a burst of color and a cool breeze that carried the promise of change. Alison watched the leaves falling through the kitchen window as she prepared breakfast for the triplets. She could hardly believe that she had already been with the Harrington family for almost 2 months. The time had passed quickly, marked by small progress and constant challenges. A sharp shout interrupted her thoughts. "No, Liam, stop it!" Zoe's voice echoed through the house. Alison rushed into the living room, where she found Liam tearing pages out of a book, while Zoe desperately tried to stop him. Ava was cowering in the corner, her hands covering her ears. "Liam, stop!" Alison said firmly, but without shouting. She calmly approached and knelt down beside him. "What's going on here?" To her surprise, it was Liam who answered, his voice hoarse from being unused for so long. "It's Mum's favorite book," he mumbled, tears streaming down his face. "If I destroy it, maybe she'll come back to stop us." Alison's heart broke at the child's desperate logic. She gently took the book from Liam's hands. "Oh, darling," she said softly, "that's not how it works. Your mother isn't coming back no matter what we do. But that doesn't mean we have to destroy the things she loved." Zoe, still crying, joined them on the floor. "It was the book she always read to us before bed," she explained, her voice shaking. Alison looked at the book in her hands. It was a well-worn copy of Maurice Sendak's Where Monsters Live. A few pages were torn, but most were still intact. "You know," Alison began, an idea forming in her mind, "sometimes, when we lose someone we love, it's important to keep the things they loved alive. What do you think about us reading this book together tonight? We can make it a new tradition, in memory of your mother." Liam looked at her, his eyes red but curious. Zoe nodded slowly. Ava, who had approached silently, asked in a low voice, "Are you going to do the voices like Mom did?" Alison smiled gently. "I can try. Maybe you can teach me how she did it." That evening, after dinner, Alison gathered the triplets in the living room. Robert, curious about the new ritual, joined them. Alison carefully opened the damaged book and began to read. The night Max put on his wolf costume and got up to mischief of one kind and another. As the story progressed, the children began to relax. Zoe occasionally interrupted to say, "Mummy made the monster's voice deeper," or she always paused here to create suspense. Alison adapted her reading accordingly, watching as the children's faces lit up with memories. When they reached the part where Max returns to his room, where he found dinner waiting for him still warm, Alison noticed that Robert had huddled closer, his eyes shining with unshed tears. As she finished the book, a comfortable silence hung over the room. It was Liam who broke it, his voice still hoarse but stronger than before. "Can we read it again tomorrow?" Alison smiled, feeling a surge of emotion. "Of course we can, Liam. We can read it as many times as you want." In the days that followed, the nightly reading became a long-awaited ritual. The children began to open up more during these sessions, sharing memories of their mother and the different ways she told the story. One evening, after tutoring the children, Alison found Robert in the kitchen, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. "You're doing an amazing job with them," he said, offering her a cup. I didn't know how to handle all this. I still don't, actually." Alison accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. "You're doing the best you can, Robert. Dealing with grief isn't easy, especially when you're grieving too." Robert nodded, his eyes distant. "You know, Caroline and I, we always wanted to have a big family. When we found out it was going to be triplets, we were ecstatic, scared, of course, but so happy." He paused, swallowing. "I never imagined that I would have to raise our children alone." "You're not alone," Alison said softly, placing a comforting hand on his arm. "I'm here to help, and you're doing an amazing job, considering the circumstances." Robert looked at her, gratitude evident in his eyes. "Thank you, Alison. I don't know what we'd do without you." The next morning, Alison woke up to the sound of laughter coming from downstairs, a sound that had become rare in the Harrington household. Intrigued, she went downstairs and found the triplets in the kitchen with Robert, all covered in flour. "What's going on here?" she asked, unable to contain a smile. Ava turned to her, her face alight with a genuine smile. "We're making pancakes, like Mum used to make on Sundays." Robert shrugged, looking half embarrassed, half proud. "I thought it was time to try and bring back some of our old traditions." Alison watched in amazement as the children helped Robert mix the batter and flip the pancakes. There were moments of sadness, a comment about how their mother always got the Mickey Mouse shape right, or how she knew exactly how much syrup each one liked. But there was also laughter, and a sense of togetherness that Alison hadn't seen before. As they ate their pancakes, some a little burnt, others half raw, Alison realized that she was witnessing something precious, the beginning of healing. The Harrington family still had a long way to go, but for the first time she could clearly see that there was hope. After breakfast, while helping to clean up the kitchen, Alison found Liam standing next to her, holding a dishcloth. "Alison," he said, his voice still soft but more confident, "do you think Mom would be happy to see us making pancakes again?" Alison knelt down to be at his eye level. "I'm sure she would, Liam. I think she'd be very, very happy." Liam nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. Then, to Alison's surprise, he gave her a quick hug before going back to drying the dishes. That afternoon, as the children played in the yard, Alison reflected on the progress they had made. The triplets still had difficult days, moments of anger, sadness, and confusion. But now there were also moments of joy, of happy remembering, of connection. She knew that the road ahead would still be challenging. There would be setbacks, days when it seemed that all progress had disappeared. But Alison was determined to be there for the Harringtons, helping them navigate the turbulent waters of grief and find a new normal. Watching Ava, Liam, and Zoe running around the yard, their laughter echoing in the autumn air, Alison felt a surge of affection and determination. They were more than just a job to her now. Somehow, someway, the Harringtons had become her family too. And family, she knew, faced challenges together. The shrill ring of the telephone cut through the quiet morning air in the Harringtons' house. Alison, who was helping Ava tie her shoelaces, looked up to see Robert answering the call in his office. From the tense expression on his face, she knew it wasn't good news. Minutes later, Robert emerged from his office, running his hand through his hair in a gesture of frustration that Alison had learned to recognize. "Everything all right?" she asked softly, after ordering Ava to join her brothers in the living room. Robert sighed heavily. "That was my boss. There's an important project in Seattle that's in trouble. They need me to go personally to sort it out." Alison felt a knot forming in her stomach. In 2 months, Robert hadn't spent a single night away from the children. "For how long?" she asked. "A week, maybe 2, Robert replied, his voice laden with guilt. "I don't want to go, Alison. The children, they're not ready for this yet. I'm not ready for it." Alison placed a comforting hand on Robert's arm. "I understand your concern, but maybe this is an opportunity. Children need to learn that sometimes the people we love have to go away for a while. But that doesn't mean they won't come back." Robert looked at her, a mixture of gratitude and apprehension in his eyes. "Do you think you can cope with them on your own for that long?" Alison smiled confidently. "Of course I can. We'll be fine. The question is, how are we going to tell them?" The answer came sooner than they expected. Zoe appeared in the kitchen doorway, her eyes wide with fear. "Is Daddy leaving?" she asked, her voice trembling. Robert quickly knelt down, opening his arms to Zoe, who ran to him. "Just for a little while, darling. Daddy's work needs him for a few days." Ava and Liam, drawn by the commotion, joined them in the kitchen. Alison watched with a tight heart as Robert explained the situation to the triplets. "But you're coming back, aren't you?" Ava asked, tears forming in her eyes. "Of course I will, my love," Robert assured her, pulling the 3 of them into a tight hug. "I'll always come back to you." In the days that followed, Alison worked tirelessly to prepare the children for Robert's absence. They created a special calendar to count down the days until his return, and Robert recorded video messages to be played every night before bed. On the morning of Robert's departure, the atmosphere in the house was tense. The children were silent during breakfast, their eyes following their father's every move. When it was time for Robert to leave, Alison gathered the children at the front door. She watched with a broken heart as Robert hugged and kissed each of the triplets, promising to call every day and return as soon as possible. As the cab pulled away, Alison felt 3 pairs of hands grab her firmly. She looked down and saw Ava, Liam and Zoe, all with their eyes fixed on the distant car. "What now?" Liam asked, his voice almost a whisper. Alison took a deep breath. "Now," she said with an encouraging smile. "We're going to show your dad just how strong we can be. How about we start by doing something special to surprise him when he gets back?" The next few days were a roller coaster of emotions. There were moments of deep sadness, especially at night when Robert's absence was most felt, but there were also moments of joy and discovery, as Alison struggled to keep the children busy and excited. They worked on a secret project, a large scrapbook documenting their daily activities to show Robert when he returned. The children threw themselves into the task with enthusiasm, taking photos, drawing pictures and writing little notes. One afternoon, while they were pasting some photos into the book, Zoe looked at Alison with thoughtful eyes. "Alison," she began hesitantly, "do you think Mom would be sad to see us having fun without her?" The question took Alison by surprise. She put the tube of glue aside and turned to face Zoe fully. "Oh dear, no. I'm sure your mother would be very happy to see you smiling and having fun." "But what if she thinks we've forgotten about her?" Ava interjected, concern clear in her voice. Alison pulled the 2 girls close, noticing that Liam had also stopped his work to listen. "You'll never forget your mother," she said softly. "She'll always be a part of you, but she would also want you to be happy, to go on living and enjoying life." "How do you know?" Liam asked, his voice low but curious. Alison hesitated for a moment, then decided to share something personal. "When I was about your age, I lost my grandfather. He was very important to me, just as your mother is to you. At first, I felt guilty whenever I laughed or had fun, but then my mother told me something I've never forgotten. The best way to honor those we love is to live our lives the way they would have wanted us to." The children were silent for a moment, absorbing her words. Then, to Alison's surprise, it was Liam who spoke. "I think Mom would like this book we're making," he said, a small smile on his lips. "I'm sure she would," Alison agreed, feeling a surge of emotion. "And you know what? We can make a special book just for her too, with all the things you'd like to tell her." The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon they were working on 2 parallel projects, one for Robert and one in memory of Carolyn. As the days passed, Alison noticed subtle changes in the children. Ava, who had previously been the most clingy, began to show signs of independence, proudly tying her own shoelaces and helping to set the table for meals. Zoe, meanwhile, seemed more willing to express her true emotions, no longer hiding behind a forced smile. There were days when she cried openly, talking about how much she missed her mother, but also days when her laughter was genuine and carefree. Liam, although still quiet, began to open up more. He took an active part in dinner conversations and even suggested some activities to do together. One evening, after putting the children to bed, Alison sat in the living room, exhausted but satisfied. The phone rang, and she picked it up to hear Robert's voice. "How are things out there?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Alison smiled, even though she knew he couldn't see her. "We're doing well, Robert. It's been challenging, of course, but the children are doing incredibly well. They're stronger than you think." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Robert spoke again, his voice was laced with emotion. "Thank you, Alison, for everything you're doing. I don't know how we would have managed without you." "You would have found a way," Alison replied softly. "You're an incredible family, Robert. I'm just here to help a little along the way." After hanging up, Alison sat for a long time, reflecting on the last few weeks. It had been an intense period, full of challenges, but also of growth and discovery. She knew that there was still a long road ahead for the Harringtons, but for the first time, she really believed that they would get through it all. With a satisfied sigh, Alison got up and checked on the children one last time before going to bed. As she passed the Triplets' room, she heard a soft sound. Peeking through the ajar door, she saw Liam sitting on his bed, leafing through the memory book they were making for Caroline. "Good night, Mommy," he whispered to a picture of Caroline. "I love you." Alison felt tears forming in her eyes, but this time they were tears of hope. Silently, she closed the door and headed for her own room, her heart filled with a deep love for this family that had become so important to her. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, she knew, but also new opportunities for healing and growth, and Alison was ready to face them alongside the Harrington triplets. The sound of tires in the driveway made Alison and the triplets run to the living room window. The taxi had barely stopped when Robert got out, his face tired but lit up with a smile at the sight of his family. "Daddy!" shouted Ava, Liam and Zoe in unison, rushing out to greet him. Alison watched from the doorway, her heart filled with joy as she saw the collective hug that followed. Robert looked over the children's heads and met Alison's eyes. "Thank you," he murmured quietly, to which she responded with a nod and a warm smile. The next few days were a mixture of joy and adjustment. The children were elated at their father's return, but Alison noticed that they were also a little insecure, as if they feared he might leave again at any moment. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Robert and Alison sat down in the living room to talk. "They've changed so much in just 2 weeks," Robert commented, amazed. "Liam is talking more, Ava seems more confident, and Zoe, well, she seems more at peace." Alison smiled. "They're amazing, Robert, resilient in a way that many adults can't be." Robert nodded, then hesitated for a moment before continuing. "Alison, I wanted to thank you. Not just for looking after them while I was away, but for everything you've done for our family. You've brought light back into our lives in a way I didn't think possible." Alison felt her eyes fill with tears. "It's been an honor, Robert. These children, they mean so much to me." The moment was interrupted by the sound of the telephone. Robert answered, his expression changing from surprise to concern as he listened. "It was the school," he said after hanging up. "They want to set up a meeting with us. Apparently there have been some problems." The next morning, Robert and Alison sat in the office of the principal of the Asheville Elementary School. Mrs. Thornton, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, looked at them with an expression of concern. "Mr. Harrington, Miss Thompson, thank you for coming," she began. "We're worried about the triplets. Since they returned to school after the incident, there have been some difficulties." Robert straightened up in his chair. "What kind of difficulties?" Mrs. Thornton sighed. "Well, Ava has been having episodes of anxiety, often refusing to leave the classroom for playground activities. Liam has practically stopped participating in class, and his teachers report that he seems absent. And Zoe, well, we've noticed some worrying behavior." "What kind of behaviors?" Alison asked, feeling a knot forming in her stomach. "She's been overly cheerful," the principal explained, "to the point of seeming artificial. And when other students mention their own mothers, Zoe often makes up stories about activities she supposedly did with her mother recently." Robert lowered his head, guilt evident in his posture. Alison placed a comforting hand on his arm before turning to the principal. "Mrs. Thornton, the children are going through a very difficult time," she explained. "We're working with them at home, but it takes time to process such a significant loss." The principal nodded sympathetically. "We understand that, and we want to help. But we also need to ensure that the children can participate fully in their school activities and interact in a healthy way with their peers." After a long discussion, it was decided that the triplets would start attending sessions with the school counselor, as well as receiving additional support in the classroom. On the way home, the car was silent. Robert drove with his eyes fixed on the road, clearly lost in thought. Alison broke the silence. "Robert, this isn't your fault," she said softly. "The children are making progress, but it will take time. The important thing is that we now have a plan to help them at school too." Robert nodded slowly. "I know. It's just that sometimes it seems that no matter how hard we try, there's always one more obstacle." "That's true," Alison agreed. "But every obstacle we overcome makes us stronger." And we're not alone on this journey. When they arrived home, they found the triplets in the living room, working on their scrapbooks. Seeing their father and Alison, they immediately realized that something was wrong. "What happened?" Zoe asked, her usual smile faltering. Robert and Alison exchanged glances before sitting down with the children. Carefully, they explained about the meeting at the school and the new measures that would be implemented. "Are you mad at us?" Liam asked quietly. "Of course not, darling," Robert replied quickly, pulling his son into a hug. "We're worried, that's all. We want to make sure you're getting all the support you need, both at home and at school." Ava, who had been quiet until then, suddenly spoke up. "I don't like going to the playground because that's where Mom used to pick us up." Her voice trembled slightly. "What if I'm there and she comes but doesn't find me?" Alison's heart broke at the childish logic, but at the same time, she was impressed by Ava's honesty. It was a big step for the girl to express her fears so openly. "Oh, Ava," Alison said softly, kneeling down in front of the girl. "Your mother will always know where you are, no matter where you are. She's here," she touched Ava's chest gently. "And here," she touched the girl's temple. "In your memories and in your heart." Zoe, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly burst into tears. "I just wish everyone would stop looking at us as if we were different," she sobbed. "That's why I pretend it's all right, that Mommy's still here." Robert pulled Zoe into his arms, cradling her gently. "It's okay not to be okay, my love," he murmured. "We don't have to pretend to others. What happened to us was very difficult, and it's okay to feel sad or angry or confused sometimes." Liam, who had been sitting quietly until then, suddenly spoke up. "I don't like talking in class because I'm afraid I'll start crying in front of everyone." Alison felt her heart fill with pride at the children's courage in expressing their feelings. "You're so brave for sharing this with us," she said. "And you know what? We all cry sometimes, even adults. There's nothing wrong with that." Robert nodded in agreement. "What do you think about working together to make things easier at school? We can talk to your teachers, explain how you're feeling, and maybe we can find ways for you to feel more comfortable there." The children agreed hesitantly. Alison had an idea. "How about we do something special tonight? We could have a picnic in the living room and watch a movie together. What do you think?" The idea was met with enthusiasm, and soon the family was busy preparing sandwiches and arranging cushions and blankets in the living room. As they worked together, Alison noticed that the heavy atmosphere was beginning to dissipate. Later, as they watched the movie, with the children snuggled between Robert and Alison, she couldn't help thinking about how this family had progressed. Yes, there were still challenges ahead, but they were facing them together with honesty and love. Robert caught Alison's gaze over the children's heads and smiled, a tired smile, but full of gratitude and hope. Alison returned the smile, feeling a wave of affection for this family that had become so important to her. As the movie continued, Alison made a silent promise to herself and the children. She would be there for them no matter what. Together, they would overcome each obstacle, one day at a time. And so, nestled together in the soft light of the TV, the Harrington family, now including Alison, found a moment of peace. It was a reminder that, even in the most difficult times, there was hope and love to light the way ahead. The calendar in the Harringtons' kitchen seemed to weigh tons that October morning. Alison observed Robert standing in front of it, his eyes fixed on a date circled in red. She didn't need to ask to know what it meant. It was Caroline's birthday. "How are we going to deal with this?" Robert asked softly, his voice heavy with emotion. Alison approached, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Together," she replied simply. "We'll deal with it together." In the days leading up to the date, a quiet tension hung over the house. The children were quieter than usual, as if they instinctively felt the weight of the approaching day. Alison and Robert exchanged worried glances, both aware of the challenge ahead of them. The night before the anniversary, after putting the children to bed, Alison found Robert sitting on the back porch, looking up at the stars. "She loved the stars," he said softly when Alison joined him. "We used to sit out here on summer evenings, planning our future, dreaming of the family we would have." Alison listened in silence, letting Robert share his memories. "Tomorrow I don't know how to do it, Alison," he confessed, his voice breaking. How do we celebrate the birthday of someone who's no longer here? Alison thought for a moment before answering. What if, instead of trying not to think about her, we did the opposite? What if we turned tomorrow into a day to celebrate her life, to share happy memories with the children? Robert looked at her, a mixture of surprise and hope in his eyes. Do you think they're ready for that? I think it might be just what we all need, Alison replied softly. The next morning, Alison woke up early and started making pancakes, Caroline's favorite breakfast, as Robert had mentioned. The smell drew the children and Robert into the kitchen, all still sleepy and a little apprehensive. Good morning, family, Alison greeted with a warm smile. Today is a special day, and I thought we could start it off with your mum's favorite breakfast. The children exchanged confused glances before Zoe spoke. But Mommy's not here. Robert knelt down to the children's eye level. That's right, darling, but today is Mommy's birthday, and we thought it would be nice to celebrate her life, to remember all the wonderful things about her. What do you think? There was a moment of silence before Liam, surprisingly, was the first to answer. Can we tell stories about her? Robert's face lit up with a genuine smile. Of course we can, champ. In fact, I have an idea. After breakfast, Robert brought down several boxes from the attic, photo albums, home videos and mementos of Caroline. The family spent the morning going through these memories, laughing and crying as they shared stories. Ava found a necklace that belonged to Caroline and held it reverently. Can I have that? She asked shyly. Of course you can, my love, Robert replied, helping her put the necklace on. Your mother would love you to wear it. Zoe discovered a recipe booklet handwritten by Caroline. Can we make her favorite cake? She suggested, her eyes shining with enthusiasm for the first time in days. I think that's a wonderful idea, Alison replied, smiling at Robert, who nodded in agreement. The afternoon was spent in the kitchen, flour flying and laughter echoing as they tried to recreate Caroline's favorite chocolate cake. Not everything came out perfect. The cake was a little crooked and the icing a little too thick, but the process brought a joy that had long been absent from the house. While the cake was cooling, Liam asked to watch some of the home videos. The family settled down in the living room, and soon Caroline's voice filled the room, singing a lullaby to the triplets. Alison watched the children's expressions, a mixture of sadness and joy, longing and love. She noticed Robert discreetly wiping away a tear, but there was a smile on his face. When night fell, Robert suggested they go out into the yard. He had prepared a surprise, a small launch of celestial lanterns. Your mother loved the stars, he explained to the children as they lit the lanterns. I thought we could send her some lights tonight. One by one, they released the lanterns, watching them rise slowly into the night sky. Alison stood back a little, wanting to give the family a private moment, but Ava called out to her. Come, Alison, the girl said, holding out her hand. You're part of the family now. With a full heart, Alison joined them, holding Ava and Zoe's hands as they watched the lanterns join the stars. Happy birthday, Mom, Liam whispered, his voice heavy with emotion but firm. As the last lanterns disappeared into the sky, Robert turned to Alison, his eyes shining with unshed tears. Thank you, he said simply, but the look they shared said so much more. Back at the house, the children insisted on sleeping together in the living room, surrounded by photos and memories of their mother. Robert and Alison agreed, helping them set up a fort of blankets and pillows. Later, with the children finally asleep, Robert and Alison sat on the veranda, each with a slice of the crooked but delicious cake. You know, Robert began, breaking the comfortable silence, today was different from what I expected. Painful, yes, but also it's beautiful. Alison nodded, understanding. Sometimes the best way to honor those we've lost is to celebrate the love we share with them. Robert looked at her, a serious expression on his face. Alison, I don't know how we would have got through today without you. In fact, I don't know how we would have got through the last few months without you. Alison felt her heart race at the intensity in Robert's gaze. You're stronger than you think, she said softly. I'm just here to help you along the way. No, Robert insisted, placing his hand on hers. It's more than that. You You brought light back into our lives. You helped us to find joy again, to remember Caroline with love instead of just pain." Alison felt tears forming in her eyes. "This family means a lot to me," she admitted. "More than I ever thought possible." There was a moment of charged silence, their gazes meeting with an intensity that made Alison's heart leap. Then the sound of sleepy footsteps broke the moment. Zoe appeared at the balcony door, rubbing her eyes. "I can't sleep," she muttered. Robert and Alison exchanged a quick glance before turning to Zoe with warm smiles. "How about another slice of cake and another story about Mommy?" Robert suggested, holding out his arms to his daughter. As Robert led Zoe back inside, he took one last look at Alison, a look full of gratitude, affection, and something else, something that made her heart beat faster. Alison stood on the balcony for a moment longer, looking up at the stars and reflecting on the day. It had been a day of tears and laughter, of sweet memories and difficult moments. But above all, it had been a day of healing, family and love. With a contented sigh, she got up to join her family inside the house. As she walked, Alison felt a growing certainty that, no matter what the future held, she wanted to be part of this journey with the Harringtons. They had become more than just a job to her. They had become her home. The weeks following Caroline's birthday brought a subtle but noticeable change to the Harrington household. The air seemed lighter, the laughter more frequent, and there was a general feeling that the family was finally finding a new equilibrium. Alison noticed the changes with a mixture of joy and a twinge of something she couldn't exactly name. Satisfaction, pride, or perhaps apprehension. She couldn't deny that her relationship with Robert had changed since that night on the balcony. There were glances that lasted a little longer, smiles shared over the children's heads, a warmth that spread through her chest whenever they were close. One Saturday morning, while the children were playing in the yard, Robert approached Alison in the kitchen. "Hey," he said softly, "can we talk?" Alison felt her heart racing. "Sure," she replied, trying to keep her voice casual. "Is there a problem?" Robert shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "No, nothing at all. Actually, I wanted to thank you ever since you arrived, ever since you became part of our lives. Well, you've brought light back into this house, Alison." She felt the blush creep up her neck. "Robert, Please let me finish," he interrupted gently. "You're not just a nanny to us, Alison. You've become part of the family. And I've felt something growing between us. Something that goes beyond gratitude or friendship." Alison's heart felt like it was going to leap out of her chest. She knew exactly what Robert was talking about because she had felt it too. But before she could respond, a sharp cry came from the backyard. "Daddy! Alison, come quickly!" They ran outside to find Zoe lying on the ground, clutching her arm and crying. Ava and Liam were beside her, looking frightened. "What happened?" Robert asked, kneeling down next to Zoe. "She fell out of the tree," Liam explained, his voice shaking. "We told her not to climb so high, but—" Alison carefully examined Zoe's arm. "I think it might be broken," she said to Robert. "We need to get her to hospital." The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. The diagnosis at the hospital confirmed it. Zoe's arm was indeed broken. While they were waiting for the cast to be put on, Alison noticed something interesting. Instead of panicking about the medical situation, the children seemed strangely calm. It was Ava who finally expressed what everyone was thinking. "The last time we were in a hospital was when Mum—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. The weight of that memory hung over them all. Robert pulled Ava close. "I know, darling, but this time it's different. Zoe will be fine, I promise." Liam, who had been quiet until then, suddenly spoke up. "Mommy would be proud of how brave Zoe is being." Alison felt tears forming in her eyes at Liam's unexpected maturity. "Yes, she would," she agreed softly. When they finally returned home, Zoe proudly showing off her pink cast, there was a sense of emotional exhaustion, but also of relief. Relief. As if the family had faced an echo of their past trauma and come out stronger on the other side. That evening, after putting the children to bed, with Zoe receiving extra attention and promises that they could all sign her cast in the morning, Alison and Robert met again on the balcony. "You were amazing today," Robert said, running his hand through his hair in a gesture that Alison had learned to recognize as a sign of restrained emotion. "We were amazing," Alison corrected gently. "All of us." Robert nodded, then turned to face her fully. "Alison, about our conversation earlier." Alison felt her heart racing again. "Yes?" "I meant every word," he said softly. "You've become essential to this family, to me, and I think I'm falling in love with you." The world seemed to stop for a moment. Alison knew she should have been surprised, perhaps even shocked, but the truth was that a part of her had been waiting, perhaps even longing, to hear those words. "Robert," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I have feelings for you too. Strong feelings. But the children love you," Robert interrupted gently. "You're already part of their family, our family." Alison felt tears forming in her eyes. "I love you all so much," she admitted, "but I'm scared. What if it doesn't work out? What if I hurt the children? They've been through so much." Robert took her hands in his. "Alison, life is full of risks, but after everything we've been through, I've learned that the biggest risk is not living fully, not loving fully. Caroline always said that we should embrace happiness when it comes along. And you, Alison, you brought happiness back into our lives." Alison felt tears running down her cheeks now, but they were tears of joy, of hope. "So, what do we do now?" she asked softly. Robert smiled, that smile that made her heart melt. "Now, we go one day at a time, together." They stood there on the balcony for a long time, talking, planning, dreaming. They decided to go slowly, to be open with the children about their feelings, and above all to prioritize the well-being of the family as a whole. The next morning, they gathered the triplets in the living room. The children seemed curious, perhaps a little apprehensive. "Children," Robert began, "Alison and I have something to talk to you about." They explained, as simply and honestly as possible, that their feelings for each other had changed, that they were thinking of starting a romantic relationship. There was a moment of tense silence before Zoe spoke. "Does this mean that Alison is going to live here forever?" Alison and Robert exchanged surprised glances. "Well," Alison said carefully, "we're just starting to explore that. But yes, if everything works out, I'd love to stay with you for a long, long time." Ava frowned. "But what about Mum?" Alison's heart squeezed, but it was Robert who answered. "Your mother will always be a part of our lives, always. Nothing will ever change that, but she would also want us to be happy, remember?" Liam, who had been quiet until then, suddenly stood up and hugged Alison tightly. "I like it when you're here," he murmured against her blouse. "It makes the house feel whole again." Alison felt tears welling up in her eyes as she hugged Liam back. Soon, Ava and Zoe joined in, and Robert wrapped them all in his arms. At that moment, surrounded by the warmth and love of this family that had become hers, Alison knew she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, difficult moments, days when the loss of Caroline would weigh more heavily. But they would face it all together, as a family. When the hug finally broke, Zoe looked at Alison with shining eyes. "Hey, does this mean you can sign my cast as part of the family now?" The laughter that followed was the sweetest sound Alison had ever heard. It was the sound of healing, of hope, of a new beginning. And she couldn't wait to see what the future held for all of them. Fall had given way to winter, and now spring was blooming in Asheville. A year had passed since Alison had arrived at the Harringtons' house, and the changes were as evident as the flowers blooming in the front garden. Alison watched through the kitchen window as Robert played with the triplets in the backyard. Zoe, her arm long since healed, was chasing Liam with a garden hose, both of them laughing uncontrollably. Ava was kneeling beside Robert, helping him plant new flower seedlings, daisies, Caroline's favorite. A soft smile played on Alison's lips as she absent-mindedly stroked the small ring on her left ring finger. Robert's proposal just a month ago had been simple and perfect. A picnic in the park with the children, followed by a whispered question and 3 excited voices shouting, "Say yes," in unison. The sound of the doorbell snapped her out of her reverie. Alison went to the door, surprised to find Mrs. Thornton, the principal of the Triplets' school. "Mrs. Thornton's, what a pleasant surprise," Alison greeted, inviting her in. The principal smiled warmly. "Alison, please call me Margaret. I just came by to deliver this personally." She held out an envelope. Curious, Alison opened the envelope and read the contents, her eyes widening with surprise and excitement. "That's amazing," she murmured. Margaret nodded, her eyes shining. The Triplets were chosen to receive the school's Courage and Resilience Award this year. Their transformation over the last few months has been remarkable, and a large part of that is down to you and Robert. Alison felt tears forming in her eyes. "They're amazing kids. They've been through so much. And they've emerged stronger," Margaret added gently. "The awards ceremony will be next month. I hope to see you all there." After Margaret left, Alison ran out into the yard, her heart bursting with excitement. "Robert! Children! You won't believe it!" The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity, between the preparations for the awards ceremony and the plans for the wedding, which the children insisted on helping to organize. The Harrington household was busier and happier than ever. The night before the ceremony, Alison found Liam alone in the living room, looking thoughtfully at a photo of Caroline. "Hey, champ," she said softly, taking a seat next to him. "What's up?" Liam was silent for a moment before speaking. "Do you think Mum would be proud of us?" Alison felt her heart squeeze. "Oh, Liam," she said, pulling him close, "I'm sure she's incredibly proud. You 3 are so brave and so strong." "It still hurts sometimes," Liam admitted quietly, "missing her." "And that's completely normal," Alison assured him. "The pain may subside with time, but the love you feel for her will never go away. And it's okay to miss her sometimes." Liam nodded, leaning back against Alison. "I'm glad you're here with us now," he murmured. Alison kissed the top of his head, feeling a wave of love for this boy who had become her son in every way except biologically. "Me too, darling. Me too." The next morning, the family gathered in the living room, all dressed in their best clothes for the ceremony. Robert adjusted Liam's tie while Alison braided Ava's hair. Zoe spun around, making her new dress swirl. "Remember," Robert said, looking at each of the triplets, "no matter what happens today, we're already incredibly proud of you." Alison agreed, smiling. "You 3 are the real heroes here. To go through everything you've been through and still be so loving, so brave, that's something really special. That's something really special." The children smiled, a mixture of pride and shyness on their faces. Then, to everyone's surprise, Ava said, "Can we stop by the cemetery on the way? I want to tell Mum about the award." Robert and Alison exchanged emotional glances before Robert replied, "Of course we can, my love." At the cemetery, the family gathered around Caroline's grave. Each of the triplets placed a flower, a daisy, on the headstone. "Hi, Mum," Zoe began, her voice soft but firm. "We're getting an award today for being brave. We wanted you to know," Liam continued, "because you taught us to be strong," Ava added, "and because, even though you're not here, you're still part of our family." Robert, with tears in his eyes, knelt beside his children. "Caroline, my love, our little warriors continue to surprise us every day. I know you'd be as proud as I am." Alison stood back a little, wanting to give the family a private moment, but Ava turned and held out her hand to her. "Come on, Alison. You're part of the family now, too." With a full heart, Alison joined them. "Caroline," she said softly, "thank you for this incredible family. I promise to love and care for them with all my heart." When they arrived at the school for the ceremony, Alison noticed a change in the triplets. They walked more upright, their faces shining with a confidence she had never seen before. The ceremony was emotional. When Ava, Liam and Zoe's names were called, the whole room erupted in applause. Alison and Robert, holding hands, watched with pride as the children took to the stage to receive their awards. Mrs. Thornton, handing over the certificates, said, "These three remarkable young people have taught us the true meaning of courage and resilience. They have faced unimaginable loss and emerged not just survivors, but true examples of strength and love." After the ceremony, as the family celebrated at their favorite diner, Alison looked around the table. Robert, her husband-to-be, was smiling proudly at his children. Zoe was talking excitedly about how she planned to decorate her certificate. Liam, usually so quiet, was actively participating in the conversation. And Ava, with sparkling eyes, held her award tightly. At that moment, Alison felt a wave of gratitude so intense that it almost took her breath away. A year ago, she had entered the Harringtons' lives as a stranger, hired to help a grieving family. Now, she was an integral part of this family unit, about to officially become Robert's wife and the mother of triplets. The journey had not been easy. There had been tears, doubts, moments of pain so intense that they seemed insurmountable. But there was also laughter, hugs, small victories that added up to something extraordinary. "A toast," Robert said suddenly, raising his glass, "to our family, to Caroline, who will always be in our hearts, to our three shining stars," he smiled at the triplets, "who teach us every day the meaning of courage, and to Alison," he turned to her, his eyes full of love, "who brought light back into our lives when we needed it most." "To the family," they all echoed, their voices blending into a harmony of love and togetherness. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Alison and Robert sat on the balcony, as they had done so many times before. The engagement ring gleamed softly on Alison's finger in the moonlight. "Did you ever imagine," Robert asked softly, "when you walked through that door a year ago that we'd be here today?" Alison smiled, leaning back against him. "Not in my wildest dreams, but I'm so grateful that we are." "Me too," Robert agreed, kissing the top of her head. "You know, I think Caroline would have liked you. She always said that love has many forms." "She seems to have been an incredible woman," Alison said softly. "She was," Robert nodded. "And she gave us the greatest gift of all, Ava, Liam and Zoe. And now you're giving us another gift, a new beginning." Alison felt tears of happiness forming in her eyes. "You are my gift," she whispered, "my family, my home." As they held each other under the starry sky, Alison reflected on the journey that had brought them there, a journey of pain and healing, of tears and laughter, of loss and love found. And there, in Robert's arms, with the soft sound of the children's breathing coming from inside the house, Alison knew she was exactly where she was meant to be. The future stretched out before them, full of promise and possibility, and they would face it together as a family. It wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, difficult days, times when Caroline's absence would be acutely felt. But there would also be joy, love, and the strength that comes from facing life side by side. A new chapter was beginning for the Harrington family, and Alison couldn't wait to see where this story would take them.